7th, 2011. You guys are on text page 264, blue notebook, page 333. We're doing lesson 6.1. You guys are to copy down completing the square. And what that is what we'll be doing today. The idea of it is we have our standard form and we have our vertex form. We're going to be getting questions in standard form. So they're going to look like this. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And we're going to be changing them in to vertex form. So they'll look like our skeleton model, y equals a bracket x minus h squared plus k. So we want them to look like this in the end. Okay? So there's quite a few steps to this. What we'll do is we'll take the example, number 1 in your textbook. We're not going to use algebra tiles to solve them. We're just going to go through it with the numeracy, okay? So the question says y equals x squared plus 8x plus 5. Okay? Now, is this in vertex form or in standard form? All right, so this is in our standard form. And they want us to complete the square. So completing the square means we have to take it into vertex form. So, very first step we're going to be doing is, if you guys notice, in our standard form and in our vertex form, we have A and we have A again. Those two numbers are going to be the exact same. So what is our A in our standard form right now? 1. That's right. What they want us to do is divide the first two terms in standard form by that 1. So it's going to look like this. Y is equal to, and we're going to call that the greatest common factor. We're going to take the greatest common factor out of this, which is 1. So we're taking out our 1. When I divide x squared by 1, what do I get? X squared. Same thing, doesn't change. So then when I divide 8x by 1, 8x, that's right, exact same thing. So it doesn't change those two terms, okay? And on the outside, we have a 5. So the very first thing I want you guys to realize is this one was really easy because our A was just 1. Okay, so the greatest common factor I could take out of this for the coefficients was a 1. I need to take the greatest common factor of the first two terms. You guys notice I did not include the C in the greatest common factor. I only took the greatest common factor of the first two terms. I put the brackets around those two. That's a very important step. Only dealing with the first two terms. Okay? Next step. Whatever is left as our second term inside the brackets, we have to put that number, the coefficient of it, into a little equation. The equation looks like this. We're going to call this our B. Now, in many senses, the B might change. If we have a different common factor other than 1, B is going to be a different number. We're going to continue to call it B just because it seems to fall in that place. So, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this number, we're calling it B, we're going to divide it by 2, and then square it. So you need to remember that little formula. B divided by 2 squared. We need to memorize that formula so that we know what to add to the brackets. Okay? Where was I? Probably here, right? So I took the 8. Took our number 8, we plugged it in for the B. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. I take that 16 and I add and subtract it in the brackets. That's the same as adding nothing. Positive 16 and negative 16 is the exact same as adding 0. So I haven't actually changed the equation. So it's very important you guys remember to add and subtract that number inside the brackets. So then we rewrote it again in black here. So, now that we've done that, I need to take the negative 16 outside of the brackets. Okay? Now, if you remember, we have a distributive rule. Technically, this 1, in this case it's a 1, in other cases it'll be different numbers, needs to be multiplied inside of these brackets by every single term. So I need to take this negative 16 out of the brackets. What that means is I actually have to multiply this negative 16 by whatever this term is on the outside. Now in this case, what is negative 16 times 1? So it doesn't change when I bring it outside the brackets. You're going to see later on that that's going to change the number though. So we have 1x squared plus 8x plus 16. I've brought negative 16 outside the brackets plus 5. Now, this is what's very important. I know I didn't preempt you and tell you why we were doing this. But what we've been doing is we've been creating a perfect square trinomial. You guys remember that from chapter 5? We created a perfect square trinomial. That's why we went through all the steps. That's why we divided the middle number by 2, and then we squared it. Okay, we're creating a perfect square trinomial, which means in order to factor this bracket alone here, all I have to do is find the square root of the first term, square root of the last term, and put the middle operation down in the bracket. So the factored form of that bracket is going to look like this. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 16 is 4. And our middle operation is a positive sign. So I've just factored that bracket. Now, if we'd factored it the way we're used to factoring it, it still would have worked out. In fact, I'll do it on the side again in a second. I just want to get to the final answer here. So, y is equal to x plus 4 squared, and negative 16 plus 5, negative 11. Okay? Now, technically, I don't need that 1, so it could look like this, minus 11. Okay? So, now what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to show you that bracket if we just factor it the way we normally do. I'll do it on the side here. Remember, we normally have x squared, 8x plus 16. So normally I find the factors of the first term and the last term, so 1, 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. Okay? And we know they got to add the positive 8. Well, 1 times 4 and 1 times 4 is going to work. So, for my brackets, I have x, x, positive 4, positive 4. So if you notice, I can simplify those brackets by just making them x plus 4 squared, which is exactly what I put in here. It's a perfect square trinomial. A second. Okay, so I'm just going to recap this step here. From this step here, those brackets to these brackets, technically I did all this factoring on the side. Okay, we'll zoom in. Oh yeah, look at that. That's what I did on the side, all that factoring. Okay? Now, you could factor all that way, but if you've done all the steps properly, you don't technically need to do that. What you've created is like I said, a perfect square trinomial, which means if I take the square root of the first term, square root of the last term, I just put those two numbers in. So square root of x squared is x, square root of 16 is 4. You notice how those two numbers work? And I just take that positive sign and bring it down. That's the fast way to do that. The whole reason we took all these steps above up here, why we did this b divided by 2 squared, is because we were creating that. That's why we added and subtracted that number, then brought the negative one to the outside. We're creating a perfect square trinomial so that we can quickly factor it this way. And what that means is in the end, if you guys notice, I'm going to be left with my vertex form. Y is equal to minus, and we have our A, H, and K. Okay, exact same idea as before. This is example 2. We're in our standard form, so I have my A, B, and my C. You guys want me to do shoulder buff? So if you guys notice, sorry, we have our 2 is our A, 12 is our B, 11 is our C. We need to get into vertex form. This is in standard form right now. Okay? That's why we're trying to find a maximum and minima. That's what this is called. Because in vertex form, we know the vertex, depending which way the parabola opens, is the maximum or the minimum, the y value of it. So, very first step that we talked about before, I need to find the greatest common factor of the coefficients of the first two terms. So, my first two terms are 2x squared and 12x. what would be the greatest common factor of the coefficients? 2. That's right. I can take the number 2 out of both coefficients. Remember, the coefficient is just the number in front of the variable. So I take 2 out. When I divide 2x squared by 2, what do I get? X squared. So I divided 2x squared divided by 2. I brought the 2 to the outside. And when I divide 12x by 2, what do I get? 6x. So if you notice, this number has changed from what it was above. Same with our x squared. And we still bring down our 11. We're only finding the greatest common factor of the 2 first terms. So now I found that. And I remember I was calling this our b. Technically, it's not our b. You'll notice the number has changed. But we need to put it into a little equation. B divided by 2 squared. Okay? So now our b is the number 6. It's changed. So I put 6 into this equation. What is 6 divided by 2? 3. And 3 squared? 9. Okay. So that is the number that we're going to add and subtract in the bracket. So we have y is equal to, see, this is different from 1 now. And we're going to add 9 and subtract 9, which is, there's no difference. It's like adding or subtracting 0. It changes nothing. Okay? So now I've added and subtracted 9. I'm almost on my perfect square trinomial. I just got to get rid of that negative number. I got to take it to the outside. Now when I take this negative 9 to the outside, I got to multiply by the first term. Last time it was 1. This time it's 2. So what is negative 9 times 2? What is it? Negative 18. So in our next step, 2x squared plus 6x, keeping the 9, positive 9. When the negative 9 goes to the outside, I multiply by the 2, so it becomes negative 18 outside of the brackets. You see how that's different? Plus 11. So now it's a different number outside the brackets because I had to multiply by that first term. Now that I've done that, I have created a perfect square trinomial inside the brackets. That means I can just take the square root of the first and last term and bring down that operation. Okay, lost that. So, would you guys like me to quickly factor it on the outside? Okay, let's quickly factor it. X squared plus 6, I'm going to do this fast, okay? 9. Factors of the first term and the last term. We know they got to add up to 6, okay? I know 3 and 3 are going to work, so it takes 1 times 3, 1 times 3. Both can be positive because that's positive 6. So, x plus 3, x plus 3. And that's simplified by x plus 3 squared. So I know I did that very quickly, because technically we've done that a while ago, but I want to show you that the fast way of doing that, x is just the square root of our first term, and 3 is just the square root of our last term, and the positive sign is just the sign of the number in the middle. If it was a negative, I would have brought down a negative. So the fast way to factor that is to just take the square root of the first term, x, square root of the last term is 3, bring down the positive sign, put the squared on the outside. That's the fast way to factor those brackets there. Negative 18 plus 11. My final answer in vertex form is going to be negative 7. Okay. So I have y is equal to, and I'm just going to quickly put the vertex form at the bottom so you can see the similarities between the two. Remember, this is our A, and if we looked above, remember that was still our A, that 2. H and K. Where's K? Oh, that's it. Okay. Remember, the very important thing, from here to here, those 3 terms to that little bracket, I factored it. That's what I did here quickly on the side, if you guys noticed. I factored it. That's why we did factoring before. You have to know how to factor that. The fast way to do it, take the square root of the first term and the last term and bring down the middle number. Works out nice.